Hello, welcome to all of you who are coming into this broadcast later on. You're not watching it live. My name is Corey. If we've not met, I'm a husband, a father, speaker, a writer, and I host this Existential Sunday, which is a space for us who are deconstructing our faith or our worldview in some way. We've got questions. We are, as my good friend describes it, we are interrogating systems and structures, and we're asking hard questions and sitting in the tension of what those hard questions are. So if that's you, this is a place where you should feel right at home. If you want to share this broadcast, you never have to ask my permission. If you're watching later on and you want to share it, you can do so. You can do so now, or you can wait till the end. Totally up to you, but you don't have to ask me. You can totally share it. I create it so that you can. And of course, those of you who are watching live, especially those of you who have been with us for, I don't know, however many weeks we've been doing this, you know what to do. You can go ahead and share it now. I appreciate that and appreciate you commenting. I'll come through later and say hello to all of you who are saying hello in the comments now so that I do not get distracted because I chase squirrels all over the room. I want to get to something really quickly, and I want to talk about it because it's super important. This isn't a church service for those of you watching like later. This isn't a church service. I do this because I think these conversations are deeply important to society. Like I think they're deeply important to how we are arranged as people and how we talk about each other, how we interact with each other, how we learn to make space for each other. I think all of it is so important. So that's why I turn this camera on every week and I sit here and I talk to you about this stuff. And one of the things that I don't think I have actually talked about yet, that's something that like has been something that I've been going through the process of deconstructing for some time now. And it's this notion or idea that is held certainly within the Christian tradition regarding religion and politics. And those two ideas have become, or those two words even have kind of become very taboo in evangelical Christian space, and actually really convoluted, to be honest with you, because there are these ideas that in some ways even conflict when it comes to both of those things. And I'll give you an example. Last week, I was watching an old friend of mine, someone I've known for some time, who's a really, really talented preacher, was speaking at this predominantly white evangelical church. And that was what really drew me in to watch, to be honest, because I've never seen anybody Black on the stage of this particular white evangelical church. And this person that I know that's a preacher, they are very charismatic, they're a Black preacher and they preach, very entertaining, very talented. And so I leaned in to watch because of that. And then I leaned in even more because they started talking about this verse or this story in the Bible where after Jesus had fed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves, I think it was a 2-piece fish dinner with 5. I don't know why you get 5 biscuits, but whatever. That Jesus had fed the 5,000, and when they're leaving, Jesus looks at the disciples and he says, "Beware of the leaven," which is something that causes bread to rise. Apparently, it's something you add to bread and bloats it and makes it rise in fat. Those of you who've been making sourdough bread during the quarantine, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod." So when my friend was bringing up this text, I was like, I leaned all the way in when he said, "and of Herod," because I'm like, okay, what is he going to do with the fact that Jesus brought up Herod? Because there's a whole story to this that I'm like, this is going to get into some areas that like evangelicals don't really like to get into. So what are you going to do with this? Because I just, I was skeptical, to be honest with you, but I leaned in, and here's what this preacher said. They said that what Jesus meant when Jesus said to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, he said, my friend said, that Jesus brought up the Pharisees to tell us to not add religion. I'm going to say to our psyches. He didn't say to our psyches, but add religion to Jesus, or our ideas of following Jesus. Don't add religion to our ideas of following Jesus. And then he went on to Herod, and I went, what's he going to say now? And he said that Jesus was saying, don't add politics to your following or practicing of faith in following Jesus. And I was so mad. I don't know why mad is always like this, like first reaction. It's never actually the first reaction, but I don't know why mad is so early on when I'm watching these things, especially as it pertains to evangelicalism. I was like, oh my God. And actually, let me tell you why I was mad. I was upset because there's this idea that exists in Christianity, that has existed in the faith tradition that I've been a part of for my whole life, that presents all of the ideas of faith as apolitical ideas. They are ideas that have no political consequences. They just exist in this neutral space where they don't have any impact. And I have also noticed that specifically when you're talking about white evangelical suburban churches, that tends to be the way that they approach it, because that is the safest play. But even in doing so, as my friend Alicia Crosby brought up on last week's episode of the Existential podcast, there is no such thing as apolitical when you're talking about sacred text, certainly when you're talking about the Bible. As Alicia said, that when you crack open a sacred text and you begin to read and interpret it, that in and of itself is a political act. In fact, my old friend standing on that stage, that white evangelical suburban stage, when he made the decision to talk about Herod and say that Jesus was communicating that we should not have politics be a part of how we follow Jesus, the irony is that was a political decision. That was a decision made based on who I'm talking to and where I'm at. And it reinforces for all of those folks who have identified the race talk as political, because it's called identity politics. It allows white suburban Christians to no longer have to wrestle with their own ideologies and beliefs about race, because I've now given them permission to take politics out of their psyche when it comes to their practice of their faith, which he said is also not a religion, which I'll get to in a moment, that I can remove that from my psyche and I can only focus on following Jesus in the absence of ever having to deal with social issues. And this is why Christianity in America has become so ineffective and so irrelevant to what's happening in society, because of this idea that Christians are somehow removed from political realities, which is also, in my opinion, a form of privilege. Because as Alex Vitale said in his book, End of Policing, he described people on the losing end of economic and political arrangements. People on the losing end of economic and political arrangements can't afford to have their faith practice be apolitical, because their daily reality is so affected by the politics that are the arrangement of our society. So let me do this for a moment. Okay. I want to define first the term politics, because again, as I said, it's so interesting to me how, I'll just say it bluntly, how it is that the evangelical faith in America has really botched this intertwining of politics and religion. First of all, by even intimating that Christianity is somehow not a religion. The reality of that is, here's the definition of religion. It is the set of activities that are, that's not the definition of religion. That's the definition of politics. Here's the definition of religion: a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. If that's not a description of Christianity or any other faith practice, I don't know what is, right? That's a description that it's, if it is of supreme importance to you, if it is like a practice, if it's like a routine, if it's a way of thinking and being that you are involved in, that is a religion. But what's happened with Christianity over the last 20, 30 years is that in trying to communicate that they were something different, Christians began to communicate this idea of relationship with Jesus being what this is about, a personal relationship with Jesus, which is nowhere in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible is there any discussion of this personal relationship with God. God's relationship to humankind was always expressed through, dare I say it, politics. Because the definition of politics, which I put up too early, is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups, such as the distribution of resources. I'm gonna read that one more time because I'm about like, oh God, I'm about to take off here. Okay, there's so much I want to say. I'm gonna try to say it very quickly. But yeah. I'm about to say some stuff right now. Okay, this is the set of politics defined as the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups, such as the distribution of resources. I'm going to paraphrase that last line. The distribution of resources can be summed up with one word. Some of you know what the word is I'm going to say. That word is justice. And once we remove politics from any faith tradition, you have removed the conversation about justice, because politics is about the arrangement of human beings, how we treat each other. How is our society arranged? Is it arranged in such a way where the rich and powerful have barriers between them and the human instinct that is to take advantage of the poor and the weak? Or is it arranged in such a way where the poor, the disenfranchised, the marginalized are servants to the rich and the powerful? You see, when we start talking about the Christian faith specifically, and those of you who aren't Christians, just bear with me for a moment. When we start talking about the Christian faith specifically, this all began in a wilderness after 400 years of slavery, when the children of Israel were wandering in the desert. And wandering in that desert, they came up with laws that would arrange their society. They had no separation of religion and politics. They were intertwined. The way that they arranged their society was arranged based on their deep belief about the Creator and the Creator's way of behaving in society as best they understood it. Because to be very clear with you, my belief is that religion and politics are contextual. They are both contextual based on where you live, based on like technology, science. We tend to separate these things out, like science and discovery, and certainly like a lot of fundamentalist Christians tend to like go, well, science is irrelevant, politics are irrelevant, religion's irrelevant. All that matters is my own personal feeling about God. And that is such a toxic, damaging, hurtful way of practicing faith, because it makes it very individualistic and allows you to have zero concern for people who you should have concern for. In fact, in the book that James wrote, which is a part of the Second Testament of the Bible, James says that religion in its purest form is about taking care of the orphan and the widow, which is a political statement. It's a statement about justice. It's a statement about how we distribute resources to human beings. And so anytime we are talking about faith in its purest form, which is why I harp so often on the idea of faith and the idea that people of faith should be leading the charge when it comes to anti-racism, when it comes to embracing the LGBTQ plus community, when it comes to migrant children in cages, when it comes to those things, when it comes to police brutality, people of faith should be on the front lines of questioning and interrogating the way our society is arranged, because that is what faith started as. Our Constitution is deeply affected by the ancient text of the ancient Hebrew story of the creation. And I'll tell you the very first line, that all men are created equal. That line, created, comes from the ancient Hebrew creation story, that in the beginning God created. So that whole notion that there is ever even a possibility of separating religion from state is a myth. It's right there in our Constitution. It is drawn from the notion that there is a creator. So the whole premise that all men are created equal and endowed with whatever it says, the Constitution, whatever that word is, rights, that you don't have that without religion. You don't have that without this ancient Hebrew story of the creation. And so us in our modern time, trying to act as if we can behave and live with religion and faith separate is just a myth. And here's the deal also, right? Like when you're talking about this, for so many evangelical churches, and certainly ones that I've been to, it seems like the only politics that we don't want to talk about are the politics that affect the marginalized, like Black folks and the LGBTQ plus community and the transgender community and like the immigrant community in America. If it does not serve white, wealthy, suburban Christians, it seems that a lot of our churches deem those things to be political, like identity politics, and we go, we're not going to talk about that. But when it comes to the unborn, we have to be courageous. You have to stand up and be courageous and take a stand when it comes to the unborn. Though abortion in and of itself is absolutely a political conversation, I've yet to find a lot of the churches that I'm aware of, find them shrinking back away from having that conversation. And having that conversation in such a way like it's cut and dry. I'm not going to go deeply into this conversation because my deep conviction that I've been helped to get to by many of the women who I love and respect in my life is that as a man who does not carry a baby inside my body, I shouldn't be talking very strongly about that. Women should lead that conversation, and I'll leave it at that. But we act sometimes in our faith communities, especially the evangelical community, like that is somehow something that can fit into our apolitical world. But when we start talking about issues that affect the poor, issues that affect Black and brown people, then all of a sudden those political issues are not welcome. And I wonder why. I wonder if a predominantly white evangelical church had someone like a LeBron James as part of their congregation, and LeBron James was giving some, I don't know, millions of dollars to the church, I wonder if that church would have no problem entering into the identity politics conversation. I'm wondering out loud, not accusing anybody of anything in case you're thinking that's what I'm doing. I'm just thinking out loud. I wonder if in the event that was the case, I wonder if it'd be a little bit easier for these churches to engage in the identity politics conversation. Y'all, I cannot express enough how important it is that we start to think and deconstruct this whole idea that we can separate politics and faith. Because when we start to walk into voting booths, when we start to think about and talk about who in our current democratic system, the activity that happens from the White House, if we do not think about this correctly from with the thing that guides and informs our morals, which is our religion, it's only natural that the byproduct will be that because we have a skewed idea of morality, that we will accept and embrace things that are deeply immoral for the sake of some other thing. Perhaps. I don't even know what that other thing, like because of maybe the unborn, will accept a bunch of other unethical, immoral acts because we want to preserve this other thing. And yet at the same time, talk about how Jesus would engage in politics. You understand that when Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, he's actually literally talking about politics, because the Pharisees made laws that people had to follow or be stoned for, or like if you did not. In fact, when they brought the woman to Jesus who was caught in adultery, this was a legal conversation, a political conversation about what the law said should happen to this person. They asked Jesus about politics all the time. I've already talked about how they came to Jesus about paying Caesar. And so when Jesus brings up Herod, or how about this? Every time Jesus says the words or the phrase kingdom of God, that is, you don't get any more political than that conversation in those times. In the time when Jesus lived, where the Roman occupation and the Romans were a kingdom unto themselves, and they had established a kingdom that was supposed to last forever and bring peace to the whole world, when some Jewish rabbi from some back hills town that nobody ever heard of shows up talking about another kingdom, you don't think that was a threat to the Romans? I mean, the whole fact that Jesus was crucified should suggest to us that that was a threat to the Romans, because the Romans crucified enemies of the state. They didn't crucify people for minor crimes. They didn't crucify people because they were too religious. They didn't crucify people because they were trying to because they were trying to save the souls and psyches of people. That's not why the Romans crucified people. The Romans crucified people who threatened their supremacy. The Romans hung people on crosses who threatened to undermine their arrangement that allowed them to benefit off the backs of the poor and the needy and the oppressed. And when Jesus showed up with a different kind of arrangement, it wasn't just about how we think or some personalized Jesus is my homeboy type way of thinking about God. Jesus showed up with a new arrangement, which really wasn't a new arrangement. It was calling, as MLK did, it was calling us back to the original arrangement, which was take care of the weak and the poor. If you have strength, that strength is not for you to use on the weak. It is for you to use for the weak. Jesus was calling us back to that. MLK was calling America back, as he said, to what you put on paper. That what you put on paper was that everyone is equal. You put on paper a bunch of moral and ethical words about humanity, but the way you practice is not that. Jesus is like what our Jewish history suggests as we look back at the law. The law, in a lot of ways, is teaching us how to be moral and how to treat people who and how to distribute resources in a way that takes care of people who can't go and mine their own resources for whatever reason. Our society tends to bend itself in a way that only benefits people who have power. And if you are a person watching this who's a part of any religious structure, if you're a part of a religious structure that is not encouraging you to think less about yourselves, especially if you're sitting in a suburban church somewhere, and I'm going to talk directly to you who are white evangelicals. If you are sitting in a church somewhere in suburbia that is not encouraging you to think less about your privilege, less about like the inconveniences of your life, and more about the people who you often deem to be dangerous or unsafe, or those people over there, if your faith practice doesn't lead you to think more about those people, you are doing it wrong. And if your faith practice is not, which you may think that it's disconnected from your politics, if your faith practice does not lead you to make moral decisions when it comes to your politics, you're also doing it wrong. And I just think it's so important that we all recognize and understand that, especially going into this election year. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for because it's not my business or my place to do. But if you are going to go into a polling place at the end of this year and decide who you're going to vote for and the policies and the things that you're going to vote for, you need to go into there, especially a person of faith, with a rightly oriented way of thinking about faith, because it absolutely affects the lives of people who you don't know, who you have no connection with, but their lives are affected by what you choose and how you choose it. So I want to end there. I'm going to stop talking. I know I've said a lot. Hopefully this has landed with you, been inspiring to you. If you've watched this replay for almost 25 minutes, I'm going to assume that it was something you thought was beneficial or helpful to you. So feel free to share it at this, you can share it right now. You can share it. You can, or if you're watching this later on Facebook, you can add people in the comments who have not been a part of this broadcast. And let me say this. For those of you who are not yet a part of our Patreon community, that is a growing community of people who are contending for a better world together. The link to that Patreon community is in the comments below on Facebook and on YouTube. So you click that link and join our Patreon community. Thank you to all of you who are already a part of that community. I so appreciate all of you. With that being said, grace and peace to all of you until next time. God bless.